As many of you know from my recent video, I am not a professional musician in the sense that I do not make a living from making music. I don't actively go out and perform. I don't tour. I don't depend on royalties from my compositions or my publications, my arrangements. I just do this for fun, for the love of what I do. Not for the market, but for the muse, as I said. And I have a really great time with it. So that's what I'm going to do today is I'm going to try to do with my computer here, with my limited systems, try to explain some of the fun things I like about a recent recording that I did was Singelee's first quartet, which if you're a saxophonist, you may know this already, but if you're not, it's not Singelee's first quartet. Maybe it could have been Singelee's first quartet, but it's more so the first quartet for saxophone. How much of an amateur, you might ask? I just spent the past 15 minutes doing 1-minute takes of recording myself doing this whole spiel. Frustrated because I'm working on OBS and my computer is freaking out and it's stuttering and the quality's not very good and delaying, and then I think it's even crapping out. And I'm racking my brain trying to figure out what is wrong with it. I'm closing programs. I am reopening OBS. I'm reconnecting my camera. I'm doing all this stuff. I almost did a hard reset on my, not hard reset, but just a restart on my computer, only to realize that the reason it's struggling so much is because my computer is on end of life and it's got 15% battery. It has not yet told me that it's on low battery yet, but it's on low battery. And that is the reason why. So I'm very amateur at this. So forgive me for anything that I'm about to say about classical music. I'm just doing it because I love it and I just want to share it with the world, and it's a lot of fun. So let's all have a good time, make a fun experience. Comment below what I do wrong. Shoot me a positive review. And if you have any bad words, keep it to yourself, and away we go. So back to Singelee's Premier Quartet. So it is not Singelee's first quartet, but it's the first quartet for saxophones, and it's in a soprano, alto, tenor, bass arrangement. So unlike strings, there's no soprano violin, alto violin, tenor violin, bass violin. It's 2 violins, viola, and cello. And really what makes Singelee's quartet so important is just really that it is the first. But I think even deeper than that, if you are a saxophonist that's just picked this up, if you're a professor or your teacher, or you're just a curious person that has put this in front of you, I think what really makes this quartet important was that Singelee had a first-hand experience. Now, this is all hearsay. I don't have anything to back this up in terms of research material. But we are told, not only did he compose for this, but he worked with Adolphe Sax, and he was if he wasn't a friend, he was at least an acquaintance, and he knew of him and worked with him. So that is probably why this quartet is important. And in addition, Singelee had a lot of experience. He wrote a lot of pieces for saxophones, for tenor saxophone, probably for C melody or something, but a lot of E flat arrangements, and you can find them all on IMSLP and experiment with them. But I think what makes this quartet so important is that it's the first, that it was in close connection with the creator of our instrument, and third, it's just good music. When you listen to it, it's a lot of fun to listen back on. It's a lot of fun to play through. I think all 4 parts are really fun to play: bari, tenor, alto, soprano. Not one is without some monotony, but what Saxophone Quartet had no monotony. What Sax Quartet is perfectly fun to play on its own, which makes probably for a good investigation and research project. But so those are probably the 3 reasons why this quartet is just so fun and important. So what I thought as an amateur would be fun to do would be on camera, using my setup, going through my recording, and maybe harping on some 1 or 2 things that I like about the first movement after I recorded it. So away we go. Let's just listen to the first system. Okay, we get a little bit of information here. So, the first thing I would like to point out is that in this publication, probably the only publication, is this note that reconstitution was done by Jean-Marie Londeix. So this is not the original engraving that done by Singelee, done by Adolphe Sax and his publisher way back in the 1800s. This was a probably closest thing maybe to say it's an urtext edition. It is probably a definitive edition of Singelee's first quartet for saxophones that Londeix had maybe really close, and I'm sorry if I'm saying his name wrong. But Jean-Marie Londeix probably did have first editions that he worked off of, and so I think this is really just to say that this is not the original, but this is probably the closest thing that we do that is a definitive edition, and I believe it was published in 1977. So, urtext edition, I think it's well beyond. IMSLP says that generally urtext editions expire 25 years, 30 years in terms of their copyright after 30 years that they become the go-to definitive edition. But then after that, it's fair game. And then if you come along and would like to use whatever edition to make your own and claim it to be an urtext and put your own creative flair on it in terms of notation and all that, that's for the jury to decide. But that's thing one. So what you're probably going to see from me going forward when I record all four movements are these versions by Jean-Marie Londeix. So number two, we have what I think is the meat of this video, and probably what I'm going to harp on most and talk about most, is probably the most controversial thing beginning saxophone students counter when they're working with the ensemble, maybe by themselves, but then when a professor comes by and explains and tries to teach, you see these markings. And it's a slur with staccatos for the notes. And for a wind player, not just saxophone or woodwind, but also brass too, this is somewhat counterintuitive because slurs, what does a slur mean when you have a slur between notes? There's no separation. You just keep on breathing, you play through the note, and you perform like normal. But to a string player, when he or she sees notes connected by slurs, this doesn't necessarily can mean that you're supposed to connect the notes. Let me try to do a better example. Let's say that we have movement up and we have a slur. And to a violin player, this would indicate not only a connection between the notes, but then a connection in a single motion. So a third dimension is introduced for string players, which is why I think I really wish I should have learned violin or cello or tried to initiate that, but here we are. There's a third dimension to string players that not only does this mean connect the notes like it would for a wind player, it also means that it's all to be played in one general direction. Now, sometimes they may include that it's just an up bow, or they could do a down bow, but regardless, even if it doesn't have that, the string player knows that no matter what kind of bow movement, I'm going to do it in one motion. So down or up. And so it'd be 1, 2, 3. And then if you go down 1, 2, 3. And what, you probably know this if you have a music ed degree, if you're a musician, but if you're not a musician, or if you have no exposure to string instruments like I did all the way to my high school experience, I had no connection to any string pedagogy. I had no idea what their world was like. They can also have this here, like a staccato within the slur. And so the slur becomes less of connect the notes, but more of indicating what kind of motion in a sort of choreography. So that's a pretty cool thing that wind players, and especially saxophonists, don't really have in on this whole slur plus staccato moment. It's part of it's not only, we think about phrasing, but it's part of movement. It's part of choreography. So when they see this dots with the slurs, it's 1, 2, 3, or you can do the opposite direction. 1, 2, 3. So instead of 1, 2, 3, it can be 1, 2, 3. So pretty important to know. So all things considered, if you know anything about your music history, you know that Jean-Baptiste Singelee was a concert master. He was a violinist that led orchestras. So of course, probably in his original composition, he probably indicated this very well in the 1800s. It makes sense. It's just what we do in music, no matter what kind of instrument it is, because the concertmaster was principal, and that was probably maybe the basis of all music education. Shoot, Johann Sebastian Bach was a concertmaster. We know him to be an organist, but he was also known to be a violin player and a concertmaster, a leader of an orchestra playing violin. So I'm really nerding out about this. What are we to do with this as saxophonists? So I think similar to the violin, it ultimately the staccato holds precedence. Why would it be there if it didn't mean to say, hey, let's do some inspiration? Wow, they got a smiley face there. Let me just complete that. So why would the staccato be put in there if the composer didn't intend for it to be separated? So that's what I decided to do. I think that's what I was taught to do, but I think without even the whole music education on, we have Jean-Baptiste Singelee, he was a violin player, he was a concertmaster. I think maybe he put those slur plus staccato to mean that it is a choreography or a movement to simulate the one bow stroke of a separation between notes. So you can kind of hear that in my interpretation. In different ones, you'll hear them connected. You'll hear them, so that first movement, da, 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 that's how I played it. But instead, you might hear that some saxophone quartets play it, da, 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 or da, 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 da. So your mileage will vary, but what I did, the amateur way, is to do similar to a string instrument. Carry through is kind of what I have in mind, that they are still staccato, but they are choreographed to go in one swell motion. So enjoy as we listen to further. Again. Also, I what I did on this recording is I really made this lead into one another. I may have or may have not, but here we have it again. At the end of this measure, a slur with these three staccatos, which I find really cool. And this time, instead of all four parts having it, it's just the soprano. So I want to think that Singelee views the soprano as violin one, the lead instrument. And so it's not totally beyond Singelee to incorporate some staccatos without any sort of slur. We view this from the lens of a string instrument instead of da, 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 da. So these motions are alternating in between. And on the saxophone, we just see it as staccato by itself, da, 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 da. So. So, fortunately or unfortunately, you listen back on this, and I think if you had blindfolded me and played for me maybe four pieces, saxophone quartets, written by different composers with the same style, I would have a lot of trouble telling you that this was actually written in 1840. I would have a lot of trouble recognizing which ones are truly from the 19th century versus the 21st century, because there are still a lot of saxophone composers that compose sort of in the style, which, should we think of Singelée as timeless and more merit be handed to the first composer of saxophone, or should that be more of a versatility of the instrument? The instrument can sound sort of timeless no matter what sort of style a composer makes for it. It's going to sound unique in and of itself because it's just so dang new. Now, I don't know if tuba has that same kind of problem, because tuba was invented in the same time frame, and then euphonium, I don't know if it was thereafter that the euphonium was made. So I see a lot of parallels with the tuba euphonium world as a euphonium player myself. I've been to their conferences and I see a lot of commonalities that it seems that no matter what they play, you see some traces of 20th century and 21st century in everything that you hear. So another thing to note is that this movement has a sort of Andante-Allegro form, that the very beginning has this tempo mark of Andante, and then in the middle we have a double bar line with Allegro. It sort of fits two movements into one, that I really think that this should have been its own standalone movement, that there are similarities, but there's also such a huge disconnection between them that one doesn't lead to the other, that one stands alone by itself, and one is 2 minutes long, the other one's 4 minutes long, that one fits, one is 1/4 of, well, I guess that would be, one is 1/3 of the other, so there's such a huge proportion. Usually when you have a slow introduction, it's really maybe, I don't know, I'm just doing this based off feeling, 1/10 of it, maybe 1/8, 1/5, but then this is the Andante before the Allegro is almost 1/3 of the length of the Allegro, so it seems kind of long to me, that I think maybe editor's choice that this should have been two separate movements, but hey, what do I know? And they're different keys as well, and they don't modulate, they don't, again, there's just this huge disconnection between the two, and I'm sure there are many romantic pieces, there are many classical pieces that have a slow beginning part to a first movement, and there's no connection between that and the rest of the first movement, but to me it just seems kind of jarring. What I really wanted to talk about was just this lead up to this really beautiful moment where there's arpeggiation in the tenor. And as I was recording and playing it, it kind of caught me off guard, and I had forgotten about it, to be honest. But as I went back and edited and revisited, it really, like, if you listen back, it's such a huge classic romantic era tension building and climax. Let's listen back and hear this kind of big tension building. So you can listen back on this movement. I'm going to post a link down below, but those were maybe the two things of these two sub movements that were so much fun to revisit, was the staccato plus slur marking that you rarely find in sax literature, mostly because it's kind of unconventional and impractical. But within the context, the historical contents, I find it incredibly useful to know that that is a common marking that you see in string playing, that slur plus staccato, to show choreography as opposed to technical separation. And that's something that I really think that saxophonists miss out on, that saxophonists are so obsessed typically with technicality. I saw one movement on critiquing the third movement of Singelée's quartet that this is not nearly fast enough or something like that. And I think as saxophonists, we don't have a lot going for us. We're such a new instrument. And so classical saxophonists have this predilection to just dwell and obsess on higher, faster, louder. And that faster component, that technical, we get so obsessed with the technicalities, like how do you play this and what you should do. But we don't really stop to think of something. We kind of conceited a little bit that we don't zoom out and take a wider glimpse of what the composer's intent was behind what was their context for composing. We don't put ourselves nearly enough in the composer arranger chair to know what other instruments do and how they are notated and how they are transcribed. So I think if you're a classical saxophonist writing, I really hope this is helpful to you to see it in a different context, to see it in a different culture, a different lens, and to just simply have fun with it. And that one interpretation is not end all be all, and maybe it separates you from a competitor in a competition, but don't let it be the reason that you burn out or just stop having fun doing it. So, and then that climax of reaching to the arpeggiation with the tenor, I thought was just so appropriate, because one composer I'm going to touch on and try to record is Philip Glass, and how much he was an advocate for saxophone and being a composer for saxophone. And you see in a lot of his writings arpeggiation, and I think it's just one thing that the saxophone is pretty good at. But when you zoom out and compare yourself to guitars and to string instruments, you see that they do arpeggiation in their own way that's really special and fun. And so it's not that one is better than the other, it's just that it's just different, and we can appreciate different styles, different stylizations, and different ways of playing. So follow, subscribe, like this video if you enjoyed it, if you've made it this far, and stay tuned for more Singelee, and subscribe to see more videos that I do. So thanks. Bye now.